Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, I like to take this time and welcome our guests and just to say thank you for coming by and sharing their couple of things that I deem very important. There's time. Thank you so much for coming and sharing time. The other is your journey. It is the tool that was used to create you and make you who you are today. And so we want to thank you for coming and sharing some of that and making us aware of your wisdom and your strength so that we can partake and learn and become better human spirits. Welcome to Threads of Enlightenment.
Thank you, Ken. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
It is my honor. I love your stuff, your work that you're doing. And so I'm excited about having this conversation. Introduce yourself to the people and just briefly, because as we talked about, and I know you've done and you have an extensive laboratory, if you will, and you have been in this space for a mighty long time. So briefly, if you can just let us know some of those things that you have given birth to as a result.
Well, I'll pick a few choice items out of my long life. I call myself a subconscious pattern detective because that's primarily what I do. I teach about beliefs, what they are, where they come from, how they function in our psyche, how they limit us, and how they can unlimit us. And I teach a course on belief mastery called the Clear Beliefs Coach Training. I teach coaches, therapists, and healers around the world in this methodology that I've developed over a 40-year period for very effective cleansing of the psyche and clearing out permanently and completely the things that hold us back.
That is awesome. You still haven't told them your name.
Oh. That's so meaningless. It's like, my name is Lion Goodman.
Oh, thank you so much. As we do, is our custom here, Lion, is to go back. I like to take the journey because you did not get here, that beautiful picture that you just talked about overnight. You had to embark on something. So talk to us at that first space, as I mentioned earlier, where we reside. Once we come into this planet, we are home with our family. It is a great space. It is actually, I call it the lab. Talk to us about your family. How was your upbringing as a young man?
Well, I was born at a very early age. And I was born into a family, a very middle-class family in Denver, Colorado. And my father was a shopkeeper. He had a tobacco shop. And my mother was a housekeeper. And my mother had been an only child to parents who never hugged her or said, "I love you." So she was pretty distant. She was hypercritical and she was anxious prone. So I grew up with a mother who could always tell me what I was doing wrong, but rarely told me what I was doing right. And the experience I had was really aloneness because she was a good mother mechanically, but she wasn't loving in the sense that I really cared about who I was. It was more like I was an object in her house rather than a person. And so I felt very alone and isolated, even though I had an older sister and two younger brothers. I never really attached to anyone. So I teach about attachment theory, where we attach as children, who we attach to and how we attach. And so I was pretty detached and felt alone and isolated most of my childhood. And looking around, especially at other kids in elementary school, I realized that there must be something wrong with me because I was different and I didn't know how to make friends or be a friend. And I watched these other kids who appeared to be normal, and I realized I was not normal. I was an observer. So I was an observer of human behavior from a very early age. And I realized I wanted to fix myself. I wanted to be normal and I wanted to be like they were. Fortunately, I can tell you after almost 70 years of study and practice, I never became normal. Thank God.
I have a theory about that, Lion. I really do. I think it is I tell people it's normal is the fence by which they keep people in. Anyone outside of normal is a problem to society, is a problem to others. And so I think it's that invisible fence. And as we are younger, like yourself and those observers that look and notice things like that, that we try to fit into this normalness as they are telling us, but we find ourselves, we don't belong there. At some point, we recognize that I don't belong there. I don't know what my other path is at this time, but I just don't belong in normal. So talk to us once you recognize that.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I became a seeker very early because of this. I wanted to fix myself, improve myself. When I was 12 years old, my dad gave me a book called Many Mansions, which was about Edgar Cayce's life readings about past lives.
Yeah.
And I read a couple of chapters and then I closed it and I said, oh, yeah, I remember that. So it was a memory of past lives and a memory that that's how the universe worked. And then I became interested in psychic phenomenon, telepathy and telekinesis and those kinds of things. And I found a book called How to Make ESP Work for You at the age of 13. And I began practicing telepathy with my girlfriend at the time. And we got pretty good at it. We were able to read each other's minds and read minds. And so that got me interested in the mind. And I thought, since my mother wanted me to be a doctor, I would be a psychiatrist because that's the kind of doctor that dealt with the mind.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my picture of how my life was going to turn out. And I eventually got to college through many, many adventures. And in taking chemistry, I realized I was not going to be a doctor. But I was very fortunate in meeting a great teacher who had his own school in the mountains of Colorado by the name of T.D. Lingo. And he was an amazing guy. He was like a coach, a supporter, an uncle, a consciousness guide, a guru, a teacher. He was really an amazing teacher who really woke me up to this quest I was on. And I had been on that quest for a long time, but he said, the answer is somewhere in the brain. We need to study the brain to understand consciousness. And he was the first one to say that science recognizes four elementals, space, time, energy, and matter. And he posited that consciousness was the fifth essence or fifth element, and that it was separate and aligned with the other four. Well, he sparked my interest in science and philosophy and history, and I studied everything I could in college to understand myself and other people and psychology. I studied philosophies and I studied different sorts of psychology and dance and mime. I was really just a complete explorer, trying to understand everything. Because Lingo said, asked the question, what is the nature of human nature? What is the nature of human motivation? And he was like Aristotle, asking more questions than giving answers. And so it caused me to really go on that long quest of trying to figure out who I was, what I was doing here, what other people were doing here. And the ultimate question I had was, what is consciousness?
Yeah. Such a young age, though, to have that insight that to become a seeker and to learn, as you stated, to fix the self. I find that very fascinating, for such a young man, 11, 12. At that age, most normal people, if you could have this conversation, is not focused or even thinking about anything along those lines. They have not been awakened to it. We are being programmed to follow certain things. And again, we are not aware, not even awakened to that. We are not aware that that even exists at that age. And that is a powerful gift to have at such a young age. Here you are, you're studying all of these things you mentioned about college and so forth. As you were studying all of these principles and sources out there, what did it begin to do to you as an individual, knowing and realizing your relationship with your mother and what you got out of that relation? How did all of this knowledge that you're gaining started to change you? How did you apply it to change you?
My first answer is in every way. It changed me in every way. As I gathered knowledge, I really was a seeker. I would say now I'm a finder, but at the time I was a seeker, really seeking the answers to life's big question. Yeah. And I was looking everywhere because I felt like the universe was a friendly place. It really wanted me to discover these answers, but I had to discover them for myself. When I was back in junior high school, I remember thinking to myself, if I learned from other people the lessons they learned about life, I won't have to learn them. I'll just learn them vicariously, right?
Yeah.
It turned out I had to learn all my own hard lessons anyway. It's good to study other people's mistakes, but then you have to make your own, I think.
Yeah.
And when I graduated from college, I had put my own major together in consciousness studies. The technical description was physiology and human consciousness, because I was studying the body, anatomy, physiology, as well as psychology and philosophy. And when I graduated, I realized that nobody was hiring people with degrees in consciousness studies at the time. And so I didn't know what job to do. So I was kind of lost.
Yeah.
And the first thing I did was I said, I'll be an entrepreneur. And so I created a mail order catalog of consciousness tools. And it was called the Quintessence Catalog of Consciousness Tools. And as far as I know, it was the first such catalog offering things like sensory isolation tanks and yantras and tantras and, and everything that you would find today in a new age store. But this was a mail order. And that business kind of grew and then fell apart because I didn't know anything about business.
Yeah.
So 2 years later, that business collapsed and I didn't know what to do. So I needed a job. So I went on the road selling. And that was a way for me to just take a vacation from college and studying and go out and find out what the world was made of. And so I traveled for about a year and a half on the road. I wasn't very satisfied. I was trying to figure out, what am I doing next?
Yeah.
I was kind of a lost hippie salesman, I would say. And so I was contemplating, do I go back to school and get a PhD, or maybe I do go to medical school, or I didn't know what, frankly.
Yeah.
And then this famous incident happened in which I picked up a guy whose car had broken down in the Mojave Desert, and he traveled with me for 3 days. I grew to trust him, sent him on errands. And then the third night out, he pulled out a gun and shot me in the head 4 times.
Wow.
And that was a wake-up call.
Wow.
And, it would have been considered a trauma. I'll explain why it wasn't later. But I maintained consciousness. 2 out of the 4 bullets hit me in the head. And I was out of my body in the middle of this incident and looking down at this van with the 2 people in it. And I thought it was kind of amusing from that perspective. And I realized I'm not my body. Now, I kind of knew that from previous studies, things like death and dying and philosophy and religion. But having the direct experience of being out of body and still being conscious was a big shift. Because it was a direct experience of not having a body yet being conscious. That incident resulted in the next 8 hours of conversation with the guy who had shot me. And that story's written up and a movie's been made based on the story. So I won't go into any more elaboration, but I can say that it shifted things radically for me in one way, which was that suddenly the universe wasn't so friendly. It was a dangerous place. Secondly, I was not who I had been before.
Yeah.
I had been shifted radically. It was a transformation, not only for me, but also for the shooter. And that experience set me on a really solid course of wanting to get grounded in reality, but also continue to explore consciousness. And from that point forward, I took more than 100 workshops and trainings. I studied with teachers and gurus and took everything I could take and studied everything I could study to understand what had happened, why it had happened, and what I was going to do next. And strangely, my next job, the job I got, was as a headhunter, which was kind of ironic after having my head hunted, I thought. That was my career for 25 years, finding people for corporate jobs. And all the while I was doing shamanic practices and I was taking workshops and studies. So I basically combined the life of the world, reality, money, business, with this exploration of consciousness.
Let me ask you a question. How did you come into the space of a headhunter? Here you are. You had to go through all kinds of therapy. I know that what deals with that and struggles in that part of it. But who was it? What conversation that brought you to become a headhunter?
Well, first I knew I wanted to get off the road and not drive around in a van anymore selling. Because that was really clear. And so I started looking for a job. I ended up in LA and I started looking for a job and I saw an ad in the newspaper and it said, make money, be a recruiter. And I went, okay, well, I'll check that out. And I got offered a job and the guy said, you can make a lot of money and you can fight against the corporations in your own way. And I went, okay, I'm a radical kid. I'll do that. And so it ended up being a career. I thought it was just a temporary job, but
Yeah.
that temporary job lasted 25 years, and I built my own practice at one point, and had $1 million business. But it took a long time. But I dedicated myself to doing business in an ethical way.
Yeah.
I had my ethics intact, and so I wouldn't work with military contractors. I worked in the healthcare field, in informatics, because those were clean industries.
Yeah.
And I was always trying to find the best fit for people. I had this psychic ability, so I could find a person who was really compatible with my client.
Yeah.
And I was very good at what I did. And I learned about business. I learned how to build a business.
Having that experience where you left your body and looking into that whole place, the effect that you mentioned that it shifted you. Talk to us a little about that shift, because people need to understand, as you said, the body is not you. And so they need to get that. A part of them need to get that, because they're so inundated with the natural things and the sounds that are around them that they tend to forget that that's not who they are. So talk to them a little about that, because that is a powerful experience. But how can you, from your experience, Lion, translate some of that to them, where they can get some beginning of the insights that, wait a minute, we are not the body?
There's many people that talk about this, and one of the most famous and good sayings is that we're not human beings having spiritual experiences. We're spiritual beings having human experiences.
Yes, I agree.
So my understanding after all these years of study and practice is that we are spiritual beings. We are soul. We come into a body for a good reason, for a purpose, but then we forget what that original purpose was. Yeah. We become embodied. We become attached to the body. We think we are the body. We think we are this person, this identity that we take on. And that identity changes and shifts until it kind of solidifies. And then we're stuck with that one for the rest of our life, unless you actually do these practices to take apart the stuck structure that you believed you are. Yeah. So beliefs create our reality. So if you believe you are the body, you experience yourself as the body. Mm-hmm. If you believe you are a spiritual being, you experience yourself as a spiritual being having a body. Yeah. And so people can get very stuck because our beliefs create our reality. We grow up, as you said earlier, inside of a cultural belief milieu, right? And that we take on the beliefs of our parents and our culture and the media and everything around us, our family and our history. And so those beliefs solidify our identity. The identity is the combination of beliefs of who I am. Yeah. So if I am Lion Goodman, and I am this person who is a headhunter, and I am my profession, and I am my role as a father and as a husband, that's a fixed view of who I am. It's a limited view. It turns out that all beliefs are limiting. We talk about limiting beliefs, but all beliefs are basically taking the universe in its complexity and its beauty and shoving it into a little box that says, this is that. I am Lion. I am a father. I am a headhunter. I am a seeker, right? As soon as you say I am, you are limiting the infinite complexity that you are. Yeah. But it's part of our language. It's how we communicate with each other. So language is a belief structure as well that allows us to take an experience and abstract it and put a label on it. I am anxious. Okay, well, that's a label, and maybe allows me to communicate with you about my state. But it's not what I'm experiencing. Our experience is primary. So when we focus on what am I experiencing right now, listening to your voice, watching your face move, seeing you as a being that's just as marvelous and expansive as the universe, I'm going to have a different experience than if I see you as a man on the other side of the Zoom call asking me questions. Yeah. So our perception is managed by our belief structure. We need a belief structure to get along in the world. We can't just get rid of them all. But how flexible can we be with that belief structure? And how open can we be to the possibilities that are in front of us as opposed to the fixed ideas of what's in front of us?
That is some powerful stuff. And I wanted to arrest you and have you linger here for a minute and talk about that experience to hopefully the listeners, the active listeners, as I call them. You have to be an active listener to hear, because the principle is those who have ears, let them hear. So you're listening with that other ear that Lion was talking about. Talk to us now. Here you are, a headhunter, and you're mingling from reading all your stuff. You're reading with all these guys, type A personality, a lot of them, and all these different type of folks, and seeing all the different types of personality at that level. You are a student of the other side, if you will, as you begin to gain more insights and stuff. How did you begin to put them together and synergize them, if you will, to begin to create something that is that came from you as you began to mingle with all of those type axes from both sides of the spectrum, if you will?
I heard a long time ago, be in the world, but not of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And what I learned from that is that I could function as a headhunter, as a businessman, as a recruiter, and I could be very grounded at the same time, knowing that that was not my only side.
Mm-hmm.
Another phrase I heard that I loved was play the game seriously, but don't take the game seriously.
Uh-huh.
So I was playing the game of business and money and management and all those things, and I knew it was a game.
Mm-hmm.
So I could play it seriously. It's like when you're playing Monopoly, you can get really competitive.
Yeah.
And you can win all the hotels and the houses and get all the money. It's like, that's the game, right? But you don't walk around thinking that you own a bunch of hotels. You know that it's a game, right?
Yeah.
So life is a game also. It's got a game board. We have a piece, the piece that we're walking around in.
Yeah.
And we're playing the game, rolling the dice, seeing what happens, and learning from it. So it's a learning game. So that's what I see, and that's how I manage to thrive in the business world while still being a consciousness explorer.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of people going spiritual. I was around a lot of spiritual people, and some of them got very ungrounded, and they weren't able to function in the real world. And so I knew that wasn't for me, because I liked money. I wanted the things that money can buy.
Yeah.
And so I learned how to play the game and keep my soul.
Yeah. That's a tough lesson to learn, because I was in healthcare, and when managed healthcare was growing in the state of Florida, and it afforded me many opportunities to because there were decisions being made at the management, the high management, C-suite, as they call it, that level rubbed against my core belief system. And it was a dance for me. So I know how that was. And I had to learn how to separate, like you said, how to be in the game, but not to allow the game to destroy. I actually, at one point, I walked away from it because of where I got, because they were training me for something, and they told me, because I made a decision based on my conscience, they wanted me to lie on something. I said, no. I was in a hospital. The gentleman was shot. He was wounded. They told me to lie, and because they would make bonus on that. And I told them, no, I am not a medical person to make that type of decision. And they got upset. And because I told them, I was on the phone, my medical director said, Dr. Russ, you are that doctor that could make it. I cannot. And they called me, man. I had to take a trip to Washington, D.C. and get before the boys, as they say. And they told me, they said, the problem with you, Primus, they would call me Primus, is that you need to die. And I looked at them and I said, what do you mean by that? They said, you have the heart and you need to kill that in order to be here. And I looked at them and I said, I don't know what that even means. And I said, look, I need to separate myself from you guys. And that's when I walked away, took off the watches, all of these things that I deem reminders of the corporate scene, took it off and walked away from business for a little while to regroup because of that incident, that comment that I needed to die. So I had to learn I went out, Lion, to learn how to come back and balance myself, because I became unbalanced. but I understand exactly what you're talking about.
Because I was a recruiter in the healthcare field, I could see it outside, from outside.
Yeah.
And I was once working with a company that sold blood analysis machines.
Mm-hmm.
And I found out that the doctors would get together and buy one of these blood analysis machines and then send all their patients to that center because they were going to make money. And I suddenly saw that blood circulates and money circulates. And the money was following the blood, and the blood was following the money. It's a horrible vision. I was like, oh my God, this is what the healthcare industry is. It's just blood following money and money following blood. And it was such a shocker.
Yeah.
The doctors I would talk to, their emotions had been beaten out of them. They had to die. Their emotions had to die in order for them to do their job. And at one level, I understood it. I went, okay, you can't be cutting someone open and feeling bad that you're cutting them open. So there is a part of the self that has to be set aside. But if it's stuck set aside, then you're not going to be able to relate to your children with your emotions. You're going to become an automaton. Yeah. So it's really this fine balance. We're complex creatures. I call us multidimensional. We have all these dimensions to it. And because our experience is multidimensional, our beliefs are multidimensional because our beliefs are made of our experiences. And this was the big breakthrough that I had in terms of understanding beliefs, is recognizing that they are multidimensional and they have to be cleared multidimensionally if we want to get them out of the way, because we have all these different aspects of ourselves, and our limitations, our beliefs limit us in all of those dimensions. So we need to unlimit all of those beliefs.
Where were you in your life journey when you received that revelation, if you will, when you got that clear understanding of that specific principle that you talked about? And how did you begin to manage yourself with that knowledge? Because it changes you. How did you, once you received that and, you had your aha moment, if you can remember where it was and what were the circumstances that brought you there?
Well, I'm not sure which aha you're talking about, because my whole life's been one long series of ahas.
The one when you got that piece where you understood about the belief system and the functionality of it, and where were you and what incident that brought it to light and go, boom, there it is.
Great. So as I said, I took more than 100 workshops and trainings over my many decades of adult life. And I recognized that some of those elements of each training were really good and productive, and I had a big shift. Mm-hmm. And most of it didn't shift me very much, or I was shifted for a day, great workshop, wow, I feel so good. And the next day I was back to my old tricks and my old personality, and it wasn't permanent. And so I got really interested in what were the similarities, what were the things that were connected that caused big shifts in me. Mm-hmm. And I recognized that the big shifts were caused by a shift of a very deep belief. Mm-hmm. And so I got really interested in belief change. And that kind of focused my attention on beliefs. What are they? Where do they come from? And I studied many other people's ideas about it and many other practices about it. And I saw the same thing, that some of the methodologies really work and really shifted me at a deep level. And others, they shifted me a little bit, but the shift didn't last. And I was after that permanent transformation. What's going to change me, change my view of the world, change my view of myself? Where's the big aha that is fundamental, so fundamental that you can't go backwards? Yeah. And so this is what my evolution was, is I started studying, beliefs and where they came from. And I looked at the technologies. And this is where I came to this understanding of the multidimensionality of belief, because the things that worked, the things that really created permanent transformation were multidimensional. They were impacting my physical body and my emotional body and my spiritual body and my mental body. They would impact my financial body and my relational body. And so all of the parts of me were involved in that shift. And that's when I recognized, that's my big breakthrough. That's where I can help other people. Because if I could synthesize all of those really powerful processes that created permanent transformation, I'd have something real. And then I studied with one company, with one teacher who had his own process, which was really good. But then the organization got a little culty. And I went,
Mm-hmm.
that's not for me. And I left, and I couldn't
Yeah.
use their process. I couldn't teach their process because they were very
Yeah.
proprietary about it. And so I asked Spirit, I said, Spirit,
Yeah.
I need a really good belief clearing process that's
Yeah.
permanent, that's complete, and that's fun and not so ponderous and laborious. I need something that's really going to be great.
Yeah.
And I said, thank you very much. And then 2 hours later, this process just downloaded into me, kind of fully formed in 4 dimensions. And I looked at it and went, well, first, thank you.
Uh-huh.
And I said, well, I think that might work. And
Yeah.
so I started practicing it on myself, and it worked incredibly well. I started practicing it on other people, coaching other people, and that worked incredibly well. And then I said, this is too hot. I got to teach this. So then I began teaching it. And that was about 20 years ago. I began teaching that one process. And that one process has now blossomed into a dozen processes that are all fully integrated that I teach to coaches and healers and therapists worldwide.
When did you make the connection with the trauma, the past trauma, seeing that the past trauma could be the baseline by which we have all of these other behaviors and so forth? When did you make that connection that tool that was downloaded into you was the perfect tool that was needed to deal with that past trauma and the behaviors as a result?
Well, my first teacher, Lingo, taught that there was a thing called trauma teaching. He said, when you're in a trauma, your brain kind of disorganizes. And if you can insert a truth at that moment, insert a belief at that moment, the brain will reconfigure around it and it will be permanent teaching.
Yeah.
And so I had that in mind, but it wasn't until much later that I realized that in fact, traumas are a time when our old beliefs are kind of disrupted, they're broken apart, and that they want to come back together. Our mind does not like to not know. Our mind does not like to be in anxiety or uncertainty. So it fixes on things. And so when the mind is broken open with a new experience or a new idea, like suddenly, wow, I'm being beaten by my father, I guess he doesn't love me, or I'm unlovable, right?
Yeah.
And then the mind consolidates on that particular belief. So it was an evolution to understand that the traumatic process was one in which beliefs got fixed around.
Yeah.
And so by fixing the beliefs that were caused by the trauma, suddenly the trauma disappeared because we were no longer carrying that particular configuration or belief around with us. It was disrupted and shifted. And so we have many different processes for doing this, but now treating trauma and clearing trauma is routine for us, and we can do it rapidly and completely.
That is powerful. I have been in this space a little, not as long as you, but that piece that you just described right there, everything just made sense. My whole mind, it just took it and absolutely, a deeper understanding, if you will, just was downloaded into me as to what really took place at that moment. And I do appreciate it. So here you are, you've put this thing together. And when you found that aha moment about the belief system, can you explain to them a little, to our audience, a little as to, I love that piece you just said, but go a little deeper into the belief system and some other insights, because I want to direct them back to you, because those that are listening to us, this is, I believe this, everything that he's being said, but I am getting revelation as he's talking. And so I'm getting some deeper insights. And so I know those that are listening, this is why I'm so excited that he's here. You need to get his books. You need to get into his space so that you could start becoming awake as to who you are and have the experience, get into his classes, all of those things. He has an app. Find it. I'm going to give you guys access to all of that. Get it and get into your space so that you can understand and be free. Talk to us about this belief, because it is the foundation by which we move. And give us some of the insights that you have acquired from your studies and your experience as you live it out.
Sure, love to. First of all, I use the term beliefs, but there's many other words for it. Paradigms, frames, maps of meaning. This is the way the mind makes sense of the world. So to start, let's go back into the womb, right? In the womb, the mind is developing along with the brain and the body. And the mind of the infant in the womb is already starting to identify pattern, because pattern identification is key to survival. If you can identify a pattern, you can then use that pattern to survive. So, for example, when a baby first comes out of the womb, they can identify their mother's voice as opposed to another woman's voice. In fact, they've done experiments where a brand new baby will turn toward a recording of the mother's voice and away from a recording of someone else's voice. So the infant is identifying patterns. They come out of the womb and now they're in this swirl of experiences, lights and sounds and smells and touch that they never had for 9 months while they were developing. And they now have to identify those patterns. So the mind may, for example, identify that when this face comes close, I get cared for and it feels warm and cuddly. When that face comes close, I feel irritated, cold, and prickly. Now, I'm using words. The infant's doesn't have any words yet. It's pure experience. But the patterns are identifiable by the experience. If I cry and make a fuss, I'll be taken care of. That's a pattern. And it's also a belief. Now, that's a really good belief for a baby because the baby has figured out how to get cared for. The problem is that our beliefs don't expire like meat at the meat counter, that has an expiration date. They just get stored, and then other beliefs come in and get stored on top of them and stored on top of them. And so we actually have tens of thousands of beliefs in our subconscious mind that have been built up over our decades of life. And the old ones can get stimulated and come back up and act again. This is why we self-sabotage, because our old beliefs are coming back and interfering with our actions, with our intentions, with our adult mind. And you probably know at least one person who's still operating on the basis that if I cry and make a fuss, I'll get cared for.
Yep.
Some of our listeners are that person, but most of us know at least one person who is still operating on that principle, right? So the baby is identifying patterns and putting them together into survival strategies. We call them, the psychologists call them adaptive strategies. And there's certain strategies that people have in common. Like if I cry and make a fuss and nobody comes, then I have to figure out what might work. And so babies are like little genius experimenters. So, okay, I'll be really quiet. Maybe that will make someone come. Okay, that didn't work. I'll roll over side to side. And then someone shows up. Okay, now I know what causes people to show up. So this is the meaning-making aspect of the mind. We're trying to make meaning of things. We're trying to connect the things to each other. So one of my friends calls it is glue. This is that. So that we're tying together concepts and experiences that allow us to survive. So we're building these concepts. At about age 2, we start putting words together with those concepts, language acquisition. We're hearing the words all through our first 2 years, but then we start having the ability to repeat them back. We get positive feedback, negative feedback. So an example I like to use is the belief that is a cat. So babies looking at animals, and the animals are like incredible beings, and then mother says, "Oh, that's a cat." And baby says cat, and mother goes, "That's right, that's good." So I'm getting positive feedback that I've identified a word sound with an animal. So the baby's having a great time, understands, what a cat is. They see a dog walking by and they go, "Cat," because it's a 4-legged fuzzy thing, right?
Yeah.
And mother says, no, that's not a cat. That's a dog. Okay, so now a distinction is being made. So she said yes to that animal, no to that animal. Therefore, I have to make a distinction and use different words for each one. So this is how the mind gets developed. Another thing that gets developed at the same time is identity. Who am I? Mother's holding little baby and says, "Oh, little Ken, you're so cute. You're going to grow up to be a doctor." And the babies are on record mode. So what comes directly into the mind is, my name is Ken, I'm cute, and I'm going to grow up to be a doctor. And so all these recordings start developing, and we start saying who we are. We respond to our name.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I am my name. And then we respond to what we're told. Oh, I'm a piece of crap and I'm a waste of space. Okay, now
Yeah.
I know who
Yeah.
I am. So these beliefs get accumulated over and over and over, like each one's a snowflake and we've got a snowstorm going on
Yeah.
and the drifts are getting bigger and bigger. And then we're dragging those snow drifts around with us for our whole
Mm-hmm.
life until we start clearing them out.
How did you, with the knowledge, began to clear out some of those that you brought with you from your first stage, if you will, dealing, because that's where we acquire a lot of it when we begin to move forward in our life. And they become, as you said, piled upon. And we have to go on this discovery to ask the questions, to take off all those other beliefs that are on there. When you had those type of conversation, what were some of those things that you noticed? You mentioned them, but I wanted you to notice them from a different point of view or standoff. How did you, once you noticed them and recognized them and saw them with the understanding, what were the tools you used to move you through?
One of the tools that I offer everyone, including in my ebooks, is basically a way of inventorying my beliefs, inventorying your beliefs. So it's a process that you can use to begin going through your life and saying, what do I believe about myself? What do I believe about other people? What do I believe about life? What do I believe about love? What do I believe about government? And you can do this inventory with this process where you begin to just put all of the beliefs out on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a way of kind of getting it out from the subconscious and into the conscious mind.
Yeah.
And then you can go through it and say, well, is this belief helpful or is it detrimental or is it neutral? Like that as a cat is a neutral belief. It doesn't really have any impact on us. It's just an agreed upon word sound that we use for a particular kind of animal. The problem, of course, is that when we look at a cat and we go, oh, cat, we're no longer in our experience of the cat. We're now in our mental structure of verbal knowledge, right? And so, fortunately, we know how to get stoned. And when we're stoned and we've got a cat on our chest and we're purring, it's like we're now experiencing the animal in its fullness of what an amazing creature it is. And then we get unstoned and now it's just a cat again.
Yeah.
Right? So we have access to this deeper level of experience when we let go of language and we go directly into the experience. Pulling back together your question. So when you begin to investigate your own beliefs, you start finding this rich territory of all the things that you've been told. Money doesn't grow on trees.
Yeah.
All the things you learned in school. Columbus discovered America. We forgot to mention that there were people already here. They had discovered it a long time before. But all of the facts and things we were taught in school, in church or synagogue or mosque, it's like everybody wants to teach us their beliefs because it helped them survive. And they want us to survive. So out of their magnanimity, they give us their beliefs because they think it'll serve us. Unfortunately, most of them don't. So then we try finding our own beliefs, but then we may switch from being a Christian to being an atheist. We just swap one belief structure for another, rather than opening and finding out what those structures are. So the first step is always to examine what your beliefs are. One way to do that is to examine your life and see what your circumstances are, and then to reverse engineer it and to ask the question, what belief has created this circumstance in my life? What do I believe about this circumstance? What do I believe about myself? What do I believe about other people? And you can actually re-engineer and go back and find out what the core beliefs are that are causing that experience, because our beliefs are like a filter we look through, and it causes our experience through that filter. When you start removing the filters, you start seeing the world much more as it is.
Yeah, that is awesome. That is powerful stuff. We can go on forever, and we have to bring you back if you will, because
I'd be delighted.
This conversation needs to continue because it's so much, and I want to take a break here so that they can digest what has been transpiring for over 49 minutes now, because it's so much. And so I am mindful of an overload, and I want to bring you back, Lion, to have this conversation and continue this conversation because it is an important conversation. But for those that are listening today and listening to this program, I want you guys to truly and honestly, and I will provide the information to you to get to him because it is important. This is one of the most, I've been doing this for 2 years now, and this is one of the most monumental interviews I've had. And I want to make sure that you guys are able to digest it. So I want to stop. And thank you so much for coming and sharing all of this. And I want you guys and everyone to buy his books, get the apps, get into his classes, master classes, everything you can find about him. And so that you and I can grow together and experience what our belief system is about and how we can use it to give us our desired outcome. Thank you so much for coming, man.
Thank you, Ken. It's been a delight, and I look forward to continuing our conversation.